Okay, so I'm going to try to help get you guys started using Visual Studio for the first time. Um, you may not really need Visual Studio at this point, but we're going to need it pretty soon. And honestly, any web developer, you might feel like, oh, I just want to do front end stuff or whatever, but honestly, you're going to need Visual Studio Express and Visual Studio Express for web. Visual Studio Express is just like C# and Visual Basic, and it doesn't have really any of the front end tools. And then if you download the Express for web, it comes with MVC and all that other kind of stuff. So you're really going to want both of these. If you don't know how to code in C#, then you're really not going to be a very good web developer. Honestly, you need to know this stuff. So I want to at least get you started, get you a little bit of exposure. If you've never done MVC before, I'm going to try to walk you through just how to create a really simple application. Before I open it, I'm just going to, obviously this is not something that is always going to be the same link or whatever, but you can just type in, download Visual Studio Express, and right now I just use 2012. You don't have to use the absolute newest version. So you can just Google it, see where it is. Right now, this is what I would download to code in C#. And then after that, you can say download Visual Studio Express for web, and that would bring you to right here. And let's see, 2013 downloads. Visual Studio downloads. So here we go. Here's this page with all these Visual Studio downloads. And the one you want, basically, I would say is 2012 Express for web. So you know what? I gave you guys the correct link on Blackboard. So, but still, Visual Studio 2012 Express for web. Aha. There we go. So that would be the one you want. So those two are basically these two blue and green ones that I have here, and it's going to be probably a little bit of a pain to install because it's a gigantoid Microsoft product, but you'll figure it out. And if you don't, just post your problem on the discussion boards, and we'll work through it. Eventually, you should be able to launch Visual Studio for web. You come in here, and basically, once you have to have MVC4 installed, obviously, and that's kind of the same thing, install MVC4. There you go, you can just do that. Long story short, you'll know that you are good to go when you come up here and you say File, New Project, and if you come down here into Visual C# Web, this is what you want to see. ASP.NET MVC4 Web Application. So if you see that, you're good. If you don't see that, then you didn't install it properly. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a project on my desktop, and I'm going to call it my first JQuery application. And so let's see, web, sanity check, web, MVC4, my first jQuery application on the desktop. That's pretty much it. So all good. This doesn't really matter. 4.5 or 4. I think I'm going to leave it at 4.5. It's going to complain about it, but whatever. So you always want to select empty, in my opinion, because if you don't select empty, they're going to write a bunch of code for you that you don't need. Believe it or not, they're going to write a bunch of code for you anyway, even with the empty version, but it'll be even more with one of these. So we're just going to go empty. We're going to use the Razor engine just because ASPX is kind of outdated. So all you need to select here is empty and Razor. Don't create unit tests. We'll talk about unit tests later. And there it complained about not having ASP.NET 4.5. That's okay. Okay, so here we are. And now we're in this gigantic, mysterious MVC project. And it's actually, I don't know, some people say it's easy, but it's actually, in my opinion, a little bit non-intuitive to get started. So I'm going to help you. So the first thing you want to do is go into App Start and look at the route config. So this route config file tells you basically what you need in order to see your first page, or basically anything. So it's here, it says, oh, this is saying that the default controller is called home and the page needs to be called index. So, in English, I don't expect you to, understand this if you've never done MVC before, but in English, this says you need a folder called home and you need a file called index. So, the way MVC works is you basically have a different URL for each view. Every view has a model and a controller, so it's as simple as that. I'm not going to, go through a huge MVC tutorial right now because we can do that later, but, if you have your, my site or whatever, let's say you have a view called main, then you're going to have a folder in the views directory called main. You might have another one called home, or you might have one called Donnie. Anything that is a new URL is going to be a new folder here in views. So right now I have nothing in views. So because this thing says I need home, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it home. And inside of home, I'm going to create actually I'm going to create a model first because the model is really, really simple. Add class to the models folder, and this just needs to be a pure class, and you always want to call it by the same name, so home model. Alright, so this is just a normal plain old class. I'll just put one property in here, public string, something like maybe the page title. Organize, remove, and sort. So this means, the model for any view means what on the back end, what kind of information do we need to store on the back end. For what we're going to be doing, we don't need to store anything. I'm just putting this in here so I can show you one simple example of back end information getting sent to the front end for those of you who are really excited to get started learning more about the back end. And I know there are some of you out there because I've heard you talking about it. So, this is the model for my home page, and there's one piece of data on it called the page title. So now that I have that, I can create a controller, add controller, and I'm going to call this the home controller, obviously. I'm going to make it empty, and I'm going to say OK. So you can actually do nothing here and it'll be just fine, but one thing that I like to do is actually pass the model to the view. So if I take that class that I just created, the home model, and it has one property, so I can say model dot page title equals Donnie's first JQuery app, or something like that. So what I've done here is I've created an object of type home model, and I've given it that one property, that one and only property that it has. And what MVC allows you to do, and this is kind of the magic of MVC, is just pass the model to the view. So essentially I'm giving everything that's inside of here, which is just this one thing, just this one string, Donnie's first jQuery app, back to the front end. So this is just a stupid simple example of the back end being able to store that and being able to send it to the front end when it renders. So we'll see that in a second. So that was just kind of like, for now you don't really need to understand this. You can really just kind of copy and paste it, just do the same exact thing that I'm doing, and as we go we'll get more into detail about the back end. Right now I just want to focus on kind of jQuery. Just want to get you started with a simple MVC project. So the last thing is to complete my view here, and I'm going to say new view. I'm going to call it index because that's what the route config said I had to be. It's going to be razor, going to be strongly typed. We're going to give it the model we created. Oh, didn't build yet. After you do that stuff, you probably just want to rebuild so that it has a DLL, actually a compiled version of your the model that you created. So now we'll add the view, call it index, strongly typed, give it home model, empty, no references, no master page, no nothing at all, just strongly typed and razor. And that is pretty much all the weird stuff you have to do to get started with MVC. So if I put here blah, at this point I can hit F5, run my program, and I should be able to see blah on the screen. So believe it or not, we had to go through all of that stuff just to see the stupid word blah. Well, let's make it a little more interesting than that. First of all, let's gut the stuff that we don't need. Don't need that. Don't need that. Don't need any of that. let's just have a body with one div in it, and instead of the word blah, let's use the value that we got from the server. So, you know, in Razor views, you can kind of get that stuff back that you sent to it by saying @model.pagetitle. Oh, cool. So there's, you know, simple example, you know, just me being nice, a simple example of us passing something back from the server. So now we should see on the screen, Honey's first jQuery app. So that's fun. So, you know, that was kind of like how to get started. And again, you know, luckily for me, I have these links on GitHub. You can get them here or Google for them, but like, you know, like I said, they're pretty much everywhere. You can just Google the jQuery API JavaScript link locations. But for me, the easiest way for me is just to look in here. I already coded all of this, so I'm just going to go into my view. This is what the view is going to look like when we're all done. And hey, there's all my jQuery scripts. So at the top, let's see, what should I do? How about right there? So now I have jQuery included here. Now, we know that we're going to want to do some styling, and we know we're going to want to do some more scripting. So, you know, I'm not going to write the scripts or the styles in line, so I'm going to kind of create an organized structure over here. I really want to, you know, kind of show you guys how to do this now so that I don't have to talk about it again every time. You know, when we do more complicated apps going forward, you'll just know how to do all of this, and we can just hand wave at it. So I'm going to create a new folder, actually 2 new folders up here. Add folder. You know what, let me stop. Be careful of this, because you can't really change the stuff over here while you're debugging, so I'm going to hit stop. Sometimes you're going to be over here and like, oh, why can't I add a class? And it's like, oh, because I'm debugging. So add folder. I'm going to create a folder for my scripts. I'm going to create another folder for my styles. So this is starting to look like a full-fledged web app. So I'm going to add to my scripts a JavaScript file. If I can find it. And you know, you can name these anything you want, as you know, but I try to name them what page they pertain to. So this is home.js. And then I'm going to create a home.cs file. Oh, look right there. Style sheet. Home. So this is going to be cool because you're going to like this. Instead of having to do all that, you know, and remember how to do all that weird stuff, linking this stuff together, watch what you can do in Visual Studio. We can just be on our HTML file here, and you can drag the CSS file right into the head. So actually, I deleted the head, so I'm going to do that. Just going to drag that right into there, and there it is. So that's nice. I don't have to remember how to do it. And then I can do the same thing with my script file. I can just pull it over right there, and there it is. So now I have perfect references to my JavaScript file and my style file. And now I can get started kind of doing something. So what do I want to do? How about I'm going to want to start putting some content in here. So I said, you know, usually what I do is I create a div that's going to be a container for everything that has a class name that kind of describes what this is, and of course this is the home page. So everything's going to go inside of there. So how about let's do a couple of things like div. Let's make a few divs here. Div. And I want to, first of all, create a container class. And a container is going to have a border. And then inside of a container, I'm going to put some divs. So let's try to put 3 divs inside of a container and see what happens. Oops. And I don't know, I'll just call these 1, 2, and 3. So I hit F5, run my program, launch my website, and I see I have my file, I have my title, I have my container with the border, and I have the 3 elements in it. And I can do an inspect element just to make sure that all that is there. So that's pretty straightforward. I've got my, well, I want to make sure that my jQuery stuff is linked up here. So let me verify here that my jQuery actually works. And in doing so, I'm going to, obviously this is supposed to be about jQuery, so let's actually do something in jQuery. This is probably, if you're going to memorize something, memorize this. So document, actually I can't even remember how to do it, document.ready. Okay, so document.ready happens when the document is done loading. And you remember we kind of did this before with plain old JavaScript by just doing a window on load. That's no good. You kind of want to do it this way. So the way to do this is, with the ready, just like the click that I showed you before, takes a function. So, you just kind of want to memorize how to do stuff like this, because, the syntax looks the same every time. So knowing how to do something like this, which is querying, getting a jQuery object, binding an event, and passing a function. It's very, very standard. And this is going to happen, when the page loads. So page loaded. So there we go. So this is really important because, I think you always use this, at least in my experience, you always use document ready, because you're going to do some stuff, like we said with unobtrusive JavaScript, you want to bind up behaviors and events when the page loads by going after and grabbing DOM elements and doing things to them. And this is going to be your mechanism from now on. Always you're going to use jQuery for implementing unobtrusive JavaScript. Unless you're using some massive framework like Angular, you're going to want to always use jQuery for this. So an example is we could go ahead and grab, if we give these things classes, like class, this could be D1, or you can just give them IDs. ID equals D1. We don't have to even give them values then, because we just give these things classes, D1, D2, and D3. Right when the page loads, I can grab these things and modify them unobtrusively, right? See, I don't see anything here about, anything being done to them. All I have done is tagged them with IDs, D1, D2, and D3. So what I can say here is I can grab them. I can say, grab that one, and the way I'm going to grab it is by saying pound D1. So now I have that. You don't really need vars. I'm just trying to illustrate it, verbosely. So I can say d1.text line 1, some stuff like that, just to illustrate that, on load I can start doing my modification. Ooh, line 3. What happened there? D1, D2, oop. Thanks for telling me, guys. You can't talk, so it's not your fault. And there we go. So, as you can see, this is kind of the first step, knowing how to use the document ready function, binding the execution of this function to the page being loaded, using jQuery to grab things out of the DOM, and then do whatever we want to them. So that's kind of, how to get started with a Visual Studio, a full-fledged Visual Studio MVC4 web application with jQuery integrated into it. Sorry, I know that was kind of long, but to be, blunt, Visual Studio is really huge and complicated. So it takes a while to explain it all. But, hopefully just this, will give you a simplistic, minimalistic way of getting started. And then the next video we're going to be getting into the gory details of some of the cool things you can do with jQuery. Like I said, commonly used methods, not everything, but definitely the commonly used ones. So we'll get those out of the way. Alright, so I think that's it for here, and in the next video we're going to be talking more about the cool things you can do with jQuery and also jQuery UI. So I think you're going to like that.